So, share screen and mute my backup video. Mute. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to go down to the bottom here. So when we're talking about the lineage question, what we want to do is to choose multiple times from which we're referencing the lineage that have to do with different times in history, right? So we mentioned some early jazz dancing, which we mentioned some Fosse movement that we saw in What Did I Miss? So that would be post-civil rights era. We mentioned the kick lines from Chorus Girls. That would be the swing area, 20s to 40s. We mentioned the split falls a la the Nicholas Brothers. So that's, where would that be, Nicholas Brothers? They kind of traversed some time. So you could say Jim Crow through Great Migrations is when the Nicholas Brothers were working. So, but we haven't done something that's quite pre-antebellum, and that's the third. So I want you to take something that's find something that's quite old, medium old, and more recent when you're trying to answer that question. So let's go back to the video. And is this not it? Nope. Sorry, I have too many tabs open. So what might be, there's not a lot of like really old movement in this one because this is the more modern one. Yeah, I don't know. What would be, and another thing about, I was trying to think, can we think of any old tap movements? Because there's definitely some tap steps interspersed in this, but a lot of the tapping is very upright. You can see that all of those bodies, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this moment here, are upright in their torsos, even though they're about to do a little jazz tap step. There's not a lot of hunkering down in this. So talking about, and there's not a lot of hip movement that we could call out from African diasporic community dances. So that's a tough one for this one. And that right there is part of why I want to make sure that we talk about what you are going to write for your midterm early and give yourself time to think about it. Because, see, even I was like, oh, Hamilton, that's going to be a great example. But I was hard struck in that short minute and a half to find a really obvious older dance move. Okay, so let's look at this scene. This is a Katherine Dunham dance from the movie. Katherine Dunham is super famous because not only did she create a dance technique, right, she created a dance style, but also a way to train people in that dance style. That's her right there. Katherine Dunham is famous because she really created dance academic studies of non-ballet dance, as we know. So she was an anthropologist first, and she went in her university studies to Haiti, among many other countries, to study the dance and ritual dance movements in those countries, and then wrote books about them as an anthropologist. In that way, bringing the study of movement and non-Western Eurocentric movement to the academic world, to the university world, and in that way showed the Western world how to value non-Western movements. And then on top of that, she also created her own dance company where she took those movements and, like most choreographers, hybridized them, fused them with other movements. So she studied modern dance in the same, go ahead. studied modern dance movements in the same way that Lester Horton trained them,
The rhythm of West
but
Indies
she
Creole
also
music is heard in England for the
used
first
them
time
with
since
different, and
1948 as
depending
the
on the
Catherine
project,
Dunham
different
Company of
theme
Dancers stages a Negro ballet.
um,
Based on Martinique
dances.
ritual dances, it tells of how tragedy invaded an evening of gaiety and how the evil spell of the
So, for example, this one, Ballet Creole, which is one of her more famous works, is based on um, the rituals that are taken from the West Indies. But the one that we just watched was a Hollywood movie that was supposedly set in Morocco, I believe. So, like, definitely we have an issue there where you have American dancers doing movement that has largely been gleaned from the West Indies and mixed together with modern dance training. And modern dance, capital M, means it's ballet plus breaking the rules of ballet plus whatever other influences people were bringing to it at the beginning of the 19th century. So for Catherine Dunham, she's got the training of high kicks and pirouettes and leaps, but she's also bringing in her studies from the West Indies and the African diasporic movements of like torso movement that have filtered through the West Indies into our Black cultural movements. But then Hollywood says, hey, we're going to pay you to put on this set in Africa, but like it's okay, quote unquote, because she's a Black woman doing African diasporic dances, even though these are not dance movements that actually come from that era. And that's sort of like an interesting, I think, moment where, and this happens a lot in the middle of the 20th century, where like you're really trying hard to not be appropriative. And this is way better than some of the other examples we have at that time, right? Which I'm about to show you, of course. Okay, so let's talk about Catherine Dunham for just one more hot second. I don't know why everything is like not loaded today. I apologize for that slowness. So Catherine Dunham, she's born in 1909. This is on your class webpage, so I'm just going to glance across it. But it's important to know that she studied ballet and that she studied at the University of Chicago. She started her dance company in about the 30s. She tours with her company Ballet Negre across the world, and then starts to go back and study Caribbean dances and really infuse those things. And then she is definitely doing training of young dancers. You can still take Dunham technique classes in modern dance companies today, which happens. But also in your Try It Yourself this week, you'll get to try some Dunham movement training. Okay, so the good notes. Those are some of the really big highlights of, especially 1950s through late 20th century modern dance. Oh, I have one more example that we definitely want to see. Modern dance choreographers who are merging Africanist movement with modern dance, right? And then modern dance again is ballet plus breaking rules, but in a very abstract, specific way. Remember, we talked about how even the idea of modern art is in many ways influenced by Africanist ideals that were inspiring Parisians that then inspired modern dance. This is how that happened. So Pearl Primus is sort of contemporaneous with Catherine Dunham. They worked together, but Pearl Primus went on to do more work actually in Africa. She went to Africa and studied African dances from dance masters there, and is best known for this choreography. So this is not Pearl Primus, this is someone currently doing the choreography. We can't watch the whole thing, but I do encourage you to do it. So he's doing basically activist choreography. And I have no idea whether, if you had seen a Pearl Primus dance originally, whether they would have like projected the newspaper images along with it, or you would have seen just the shadows as projections. But Pearl Primus really did activist choreography, which is to say that she had a concert stage audience. So, there's upper class people who can afford more costly tickets coming to see your work. And those upper class people are often going to be white people who might normally go to see the ballet, but instead they're going to come and see this work, which is going to educate them about the realities of lynching. That's a big activist act, to not just put your art on stage, but to be willing to upset your audience about the realities of things in this country. Sorry, this is more graphic. I would have warned you if I had remembered to do so, and I apologize for that. But let's leave it with Pearl Primus being an amazing choreographer, dance academist, and also just a gift to our country, because she really challenged audiences to use their understanding of the human condition to make the world better, and not just, go watch two young people fall in love with a bunch of fairies, which is sometimes what ballet had been about at that time, which is why so many people were rejecting it in the 20th century. Okay. Kian, I think there actually is in the assignment. There's a really detailed description. Sorry, I'm just seeing that question. Okay, so let's look at some embarrassing examples. And we definitely need to look at some awesome examples of Alvin Ailey. We're going to watch Revelations in a moment. Okay, so last week we talked about how many of the jazz choreographers of the civil rights era and also the swing era, so Fred Astaire and Jerome Robbins, who did West Side Story on Broadway, how they recognized that America is, as we used to say, a melting pot. Now we don't say that as much anymore, because we know that the melting doesn't happen like a big bowl of happy fondue. And so, but at the time, Jerome Robbins would be a white man who has like a lot of power by being able to place shows on a giant concert stage, and by power I mean that his voice reaches a lot of people, and so he wanted to use his influence to represent, for example, the Puerto Rican population in New York City through West Side Story, and to really celebrate their dance and culture. And also he did Seven Brothers, Seven Brides. Oh, I can see it in my mind. It's gonna come to me. It was not just the Puerto Rican dances that he put on stage. He also did, why am I not thinking of this dance? It's Russian, Jewish, authentic dances, musical. It's going to come to me like as soon as we stop talking. But in those cases, we still had white choreographers who usually were hiring mostly white dancers for white audiences, even though the dances themselves, as opposed to in the early 1900s, were they didn't give credit for where those dance moves came from. They mostly just kind of did them and took credit for the skill. Even though they might have been trained by black dancers in the early tap era, they might not have been giving credit to those black dancers on stage. So if you were totally ignorant about where those dances came from, all you would see is a famous person doing a dance that you liked, and you wouldn't understand where it came from. So in the 50s and 60s, we start to see people giving credit, but they're still not casting. And so by the time in modern dance, earlier, they start to hire those dancers, but we're not giving credit to where the movement's coming from. And so then 1960s come along, Alvin Ailey is like a black man running a company that is almost all people of color. Martha Graham was a white woman in the 30s and 40s who was doing movement that was her own, but also based on Horton technique, so a bit of Native American influence. Definitely a lot of ballet influence, but also just like breaking the rules and sort of elements from an idealized East Asian, but at least those modern dance choreographers, although they weren't giving credit to where the movement came from authentically, they were breaking the rules about hiring integrated dance companies. So that means people of color and white people performing together on, like, as paid dancers on tour, everybody on the same stage. So that was still challenging segregation laws, right, at the time. So it's the progress is incremental, is what I'm saying. So now I'm going to show you an example of like a good and a bad example of incremental change of representing Black diasporic dance in this country with good intention and how it can still not go very well. The first one's the positive one. So we're going to look at Slap That Bass by Fred Astaire, which I just think is really cool. So this is 1937. And you can see this is a Hollywood film musical, right? So it takes place on a cruise ship, and you have a representation of the Black workers who are working down in the machine room. And so you have syncopated rhythms. You have the element of cool for sure. There's Stretch there on the left there. He's downstairs.
The world is in a mess. Yeah. Politics and taxes and people grinding axes. There's no happiness. Zoom, 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 zoom. Rhythm lead your ears. The future doesn't fret me. If I can only get me someone to snap that bass. Happiness is not as little when I'm listening to that big bass.
Forward a bit. Obviously, Fred Astaire is going to sing back to them and then start dancing. There's a lot to be said here about polyrhythm, polycentrism, right? Both Fred Astaire and the other dancers are used by isolating different parts of their body and doing conflicting rhythms or multiple rhythms at the same time. And we know that Fred Astaire started with ballet training. If you know how to look for ballet like markers, you can definitely tell that he is making fun of ballet with certain things he does there. So for example, he was just holding his arms out in front of his body in what's called a low hip position, but he was doing it super wiltingly and with bad posture. So pause here. I don't know, I can't see my face today while I'm doing screen share. So a low fifth position would be out here, and you have this like parenthesis shape of your arm. But he was doing it purposefully, like dropping his elbows and dropping the wrist, which is sort of how you start out when you first learn ballet. It looks really kind of like, because you're not, it just takes effort to hold it in that stiff position. And so he lets his arms kind of go in this like a bad ballet shape on purpose while he's doing exacting tap below. And then he looks at his arms like, this is so old, I'm so over this. And he goes, ugh, and he drops the arm. So he's throwing away symbolically elements of ballet to choose the elements of tap and African diasporic movement that we see him continue into. And I think there's another example of that later, actually. Obviously, we are going to resist ourselves. Oh, yeah, here we go. So, ephebism, right? He just flipped himself up to the second story over that bar. Polyrhythm. Ballet, he's like, no, I don't want to do that ballet step. I'm going to move on. So There's also, he's going to do a part where he does like a fake ballet bar movement and then throws that away. So it's called Slap That Bass. It's a really interesting comment on how in 1937 Fred Astaire is saying that ballet is old news. We don't need that anymore. Let's look at jazz dances, in particular tap. So we know that Fred Astaire is one of the most influential dancers in the world. That we know from a couple weeks ago that he influenced Michael Jackson, and in particular, the Bandwagon influenced the Smooth Criminal video, which was super, super famous. And we know that Fred Astaire himself idolized and learned from Bojangles. So later in Fred Astaire's career, he did a show performance choreography in honor of Bojangles, and it takes many of the elements of Bojangles and references them, but also are sort of in Fred Astaire's style. And I'm trying to like tell you the highlights of what I'm about to show you, because then he puts on blackface. No! So let's look at a bad example of white choreographers really doing right by the dancing and really doing wrong with the appropriation and racial stereotypes. Because things are complicated and improvements take a long time. I don't think I have the first. I'm trying to think if there's the... Let's go a bit later. Okay. Oh, I don't think I took you with me. There we go. So he starts this dance number sort of with this set piece that looks like two giant shoes that come out, which of course reference, and this reference is the stereotype of, this is a pretty bad blackface stereotype, but he is making a comment about the history of minstrelsy. And it's interesting in the previous scene that he is using this contrast of white and black, and that you see, I'm going to pop us back here. The symbolism of this setup right here, where he is a white man in blackface on stage doing black stereotypes, but that behind him are three shadows, outlines, bigger and more powerful and influential, of quote unquote black men, right? Because the shadows are black versus him being white, is really like a comment. It's a subtle symbol about him saying that although I may be the white star on stage, the reason we have these dances is because there were all of these famous black dancers who came before me and created this movement. But that's pretty subtle, right? That's awfully subtle. That's asking a lot of your audience to get that that's what you're saying. Okay, let's see. I think we've covered these biggies. So now we get to look at elements of revelations. Okay, go ahead and open a new tab. Now, we are a bit bouncing around here. Yay. One of the best things about COVID, you guys, has been that the Alvin Ailey Company decided to put their work online. Previously, you had to see it live or travel to their library in order to watch it. so I'm going to pause for a moment here because there's just a gazillion bajillion things to say. So Alvin Ailey, as we said, studied with Lester Horton, took over his company, and then created Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. Revelations is his masterpiece. It's been shown all over the world. They perform it every year, like ballet companies perform the Nutcracker. Alvin Ailey Dance Company, everybody performs Revelations. So it's in 3 sections. This first section is very, you can see a lot of elements of modern dance here. You can see these low lunges that are sort of influenced from that like Horton American, Native American idealism. Remember we saw that like Ted Shaw ideal of like what is a masculine, remember we talked a little bit about how like quote unquote primitivism influenced modern art. So that is an element that lingers on here in this movement. Yeah, these giant lunges. You can also see this man, I don't know, I think you guys can see my cursor, but this man who's standing up in the back with his arms in second position, super upright body. He's in a 4th position. He's definitely, this is a ballet stance, like no joke. And you can see this woman in penché in the middle with her leg up in the air. You can see this absolutely balletically trained foot, right? Regular toes don't look like this. And so we see those elements, modern dance and ballet. This woman in the front down here, sorry, you can barely see her. She's doing what's called a Martha Graham pleating. So that's definitely a modern, capital M, early American concert dance element. And yet we also saw these chest undulations. So I'm going to scooch us forward. Chest undulations are absolutely from African diasporic dance. Definitely modern dance is I want to dance when I see this. Okay, so that's didn't. You also notice that he is choreographing to American gospel music. We have lifts from ballet training. The arms that are not so then this last segment? No, that's the last segment. These final 2 segments are about this is background from a Southern Baptist baptism rituals. And remember, Alvin Ailey is from the 20th century, so a lot of people make the mistake of saying that this dance is about slavery. It is not about slavery. It's about what Alvin Ailey referred to as blood memories, which is to say that they feel like these are cultural memories and parts of the African American experience. But this dance is not about slavery. It is about the African American experience, especially about his mother's experience with segregation, the civil rights era, and Black Baptist Christian tradition in America. You're going to see some of those undulations of the torso that we know come from West African movements that went into the Caribbean with the slave trade and came into the South via that pathway. Just forward. Burp, 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 burp. Just wait a minute. Down to the river. Oh, man, down to the river. All worth watching, and I'm so excited that you guys can watch it for free now. Also, can we talk about this? My goodness. He's jumping like 5 feet in the air. Not training, that he does. Important technique training. So while there are different elements in there that come from ballet, this gentleman's training now is also really fun. Important. You learn all of these movements in a horse dance. That's 20th century masculine power. And where does that idea come from? African elements. Cool. Hooray! All right, let's stop there because that's a good note to end on, I think. Here are, let's go to our share screen. Okay. Here we have, and again, you can come and visit me on Friday during office hours to ask more questions about this. And we will also meet after spring break to go over in depth the questions for the midterm, but let's touch on them before we go. So for your choosing what to write about, you're going to need to know, you're gonna be mentioning these sort of eras in American history. The Middle Crossing to 1619, the Black Codes, Congo Square. So we're talking about the dancing that happened when it was illegal for African Americans, were they Americans at the time, for Black slaves to meet or have instruments. And so they started to do pat and juba, etc. Pre-antebellum conditions in the North and South, right? So there was slavery in the South, but there was also strict segregation in the North, and it was not fair or even. Civil War to Reconstruction. Remember, we talked about how Reconstruction was a really great time where lots of Black men, but not yet women, started to take political power and action, and then how Jim Crow laws that happened as Reconstruction ended started to strip those rights and voting rights away from Black people in the South. How World War I and the Great Migration was a great moment for Black people's respect to grow as they started to move out of the South and become middle-class citizens across the country. But it also showed us that where we had sort of assumed that slavery was the form of racism that we had in this country, that was not accurate. And we had the redlining and the restriction of giving homeowners laws and segregation of neighborhoods. All of that was beginning to come out during the Great Migration. The 1920s to 1940s, we've got all of those dances that became popular and spread around the world during World War I and in circuses within America. So jazz dance evolves from jazz. I mean, ragtime is jazz. Ragtime went around with the circuses before World War I, but it developed into jazz and jazz dance and swing dancing and Lindy Hop, and those took over the world in popularity. So there we have like the rise of Bojangles, the rise of Josephine Baker, who we'll get to more after the midterm, and the swing era. That leads us into World War II, and after World War II, where again we have Black soldiers changing of the American perspective of their ability and capability in our country because of their sacrifices. We also go into the Civil Rights era, where we again see this question about whether integration or desegregation is the right way to go, and many people think of the Civil Rights era as having started in the Great Migration and like sort of culminating in the 1960s. In the dance world during the Civil Rights era, we see, first those choreographers who are really, white choreographers who were really pressing to try their awkward best to represent Black dance and Black choreographers in this country, starting to be able to integrate their dance companies some, but also by the time we get to the civil rights era, then we also get Black choreographers with famous concert dance companies on the world stage. So that would be Katherine Dunham, Alvin Ailey, Pearl Primus, etc. Their big rising up to the world stage happened in the civil rights era, and that also brought attention to Black dance into academia at that time. You're definitely going to want to know the Africanist elements and to be able to explain, like describe a dance move and explain how that dance move represents each of them. And I don't have your list right here. Okay, let me go back to the other page. And then we got to run. Boop. So over here in your peer review midterm study guide assignment, there's that list of things I just talked about. Yeah. Other things. And then your actual midterm essay questions are going to be right there. So remember I talked about focus on lineage and picking a dance. So you're going to pick one particular dance, not a dance style, not a dance type, not a dance move, but like an actual video is a good way to think about it. You're going to discuss that choreography and whether the movement's appropriated, whether it is blind cast or not, whether there's authentic dance training. And you're going to name 3 sources. And remember, you want to pick those 3 sources from 3 different eras. Preferably a really old influence and a medium and a more current influence. Definitely not all from the same era is the thing I look for when I grade that one. Focus on civil rights. We'll talk more about these other 2 next week or after we come back from spring break. Focus on civil rights is going to be talking about a group of color or a single performer of color and how they faced obstacles in the real world. And I mean like specific barriers. So don't just tell me it was hard for them to become popular because that's not detailed enough. Yeah, we want to really talk about race in this country in this civil rights discussion. And then I want you to talk about what expectations did mainstream audiences have? And that means talking about stereotypes that they experienced and how did their work comply and or resist with those racial stereotypes. So did they do them because you had to? Remember, we talked a lot about that in the economy section, so C. Or did they flip those stereotypes? And if so, like give me an example of how they did or didn't flip the stereotypes. And then Africanist elements, we're going to talk about the Dixon and Thompson Africanist elements. And you're going to choose one dance, like a video, and talk about the way that the 5 elements work in that dance. Yeah, so we looked today at the Slap That Bass Fred Astaire video, and we started to talk about examples of the Africanist elements as they were seen in that particular dance. So those are the 3 questions, and we will talk again about them when we get back from break. And that is it for today. Ta-da! And I'm going to rush out of here. Yeah.
I have a question.
Thank you, guys. I would love to see you. Come ask me any questions at all. Like, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So please come ask me questions if you want to ask me on Friday. Like, hey, is this a good example to use for this? You know, like I want to write about lineage using this dance. Would it work? You can come bring me those things to vet on Friday during office hours. Okay. And then we'll talk more about them on not Tuesday, but the Tuesday after spring break. So you guys should feel very well prepared.
Thank you.
Oh, Professor, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, Ned. Yes.
So for the short essay 1 and the short essay 3, we can use any dance we want, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much true. If you're feeling unsure, come ask me. But
Okay.
yes, you can, especially the one where it's like talking about lineage. It's totally great if you bring like a Beyonce video to me that came out last week. And then you say, look, I see this, this, and that in it. That would be awesome.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
And you don't have to use Beyonce, but I'm just saying like really anything is on the table as long as you relate it to the elements that we're talking about in this class.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. All right, I'm off to cardio dance. I hope to see you guys.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.